The honourable member for Haldimand-Norfolk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on March 22nd, the Liberal government released their 2016 federal budget. Now, I stand here today deeply disappointed with the many broken promises that were in that document. The Prime Minister made promises to support the middle class while keeping the annual deficit at no more than $10 billion a year for 3 years. Now, that's what Canadians were led to expect, but the Liberals' own deficit forecast has come in much higher than that over many more years. Indeed, over the term of this government, there's no end in sight to deficit financing. Now, it's so bad, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberals are actually repealing the Federal Balanced Budget Act because, as the budget itself says, and I quote, "The current legislation is inconsistent with the government's plan." In other words, Mr. Speaker, the law is an inconvenience. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is a plan that is reckless, it's ineffective, and it's one that gives little consideration to the future financial health of our families or indeed our country. The budget confirmed that the Liberals are raising taxes on hard-working, honest families, on eager young students, and on enterprising small businesses, which will only hurt the people in my home of Haldimand-Norfolk. Now, Mr. Speaker, you know, and I know, and every responsible Canadian knows, that borrowed money has to be paid back, which is why, I guess, the Liberals are already raising taxes. In fact, personal income taxes are set to go up by $1.3 billion this year and $2.4 billion next year. And yet, despite promising support for middle-class families, the Liberal government is going to repeal many tax programs that were brought in by our last Conservative government, especially to help families. Programs like the family income splitting, the child tax benefit, and the universal child care benefit, of which I'm particularly fond. Now, over 9.4 million families in Canada will be directly affected by these changes, including 32,000 families in my home riding. The new Canada Child Benefit claims to boost payments to some families, but it comes at the expense of existing child benefits. At least 10% of families will be losing the support altogether, and mark my words, Mr. Speaker, that 10% number could go a whole lot higher. Now, the Liberal government is also taking away the children's fitness and arts tax credits in Haldimand-Norfolk alone. The parents of some 21,000 children under the age of 16 have been eligible for these tax credits up till now, tax credits totaling $1,500 each year. Unfortunately, these families will no longer be eligible. Mr. Speaker, Canadian Conservatives have always understood that Canadians work hard, and we support policies that put more money where it belongs, back in the pockets of Canadians. One of the things that I was pleased to see in the budget was that there will be an increase to the guaranteed income supplement for seniors. But I was disappointed, however, in the Liberals' changes to the Canada Student Loan Program, because despite what they said, their own numbers show that 1 in 5 students will benefit. Only 1 in 5. That's certainly not the way they're promoting it. And this becomes even more disturbing when you realize that they're also taking away the Conservative-introduced tax credits for textbooks and for tuition, which were credits that were available not just to a few, but to all post-secondary students. Another huge hit is going to be to Canadian small businesses through higher payroll taxes. The government will not be lowering the business tax rate to 9% as they promised. Instead, they'll hold it at 10.5% and introduce new conditions around eligibility. Now, many small businesses describe this broken promise as a shock. Here's what the Canadian Federation of Independent Business had to say, and I quote, "In its platform, in a written letter to CFIB members and in campaign stops across the country, the new government promised to reduce the small business corporate tax rate to 9% by 2019. That promise was broken today," end quote. This was said by Dan Kelly, the president of the CFIB. Mr. Speaker, this decision alone will cost firms almost $1 billion per year, starting 2019. Mr. Speaker, this broken promise comes as no surprise, considering that the Prime Minister himself called small businesses, and I quote, tax havens for the rich. Now, Canadians know that this is simply not true. Small business owners devote countless hours to their businesses with a 51% survival rate over 5 years. There are some 1.2 million small SMEs in Canada, with the average worker taking home just $750 a week before taxes, which is $100 lower than the average of $850. This government has to do better for small businesses because small businesses are the backbone of the Canadian economy. Small businesses are indeed a key to a thriving Canadian economy because they make up 98% of all Canadian companies and employ 70% of the private sector labor force. The Liberal budget did not renew the tax credit for EI premiums paid by small businesses, and over $1 billion in new EI expenditures points only to higher premiums for all employers in the near future. Another disappointment was that there was nothing new in the budget that offered support for our agricultural producers, such as I have in Haldimand-Norfolk, or indeed anywhere else in Canada, despite the agri-food sector accounting for over $100 billion in economic activity and employing more than 2 million Canadians. There was no direct commitment to this key part of our economy. Conservative MPs have always supported infrastructure, investing more than any federal government in history, to the point that we ranked second among the G7 in 2014. Infrastructure spending needs to be prioritized in a way that creates both short-term and long-term jobs and makes Canada an attractive place for a business to invest. Most people envision infrastructure as building roads and bridges. They think of investments that reduce gridlock, thereby making it easier for people to get to work, to get home, and to get their goods to market. To the Liberals, infrastructure is divided into 3 main project pots: transit, green initiatives, and what they refer to as social infrastructure. For transit, the budget allocates $3.4 billion over 3 years, which does nothing to help rural ridings like Haldimand-Norfolk. And their green infrastructure fund, well, it accounts for $5 billion over 5 years, but only $650 million is to be spent this year. The Liberals also claim that they will spend $3.4 billion on social infrastructure over the next 5 years. Well, we have to wonder, will that be put off until after the next election too? And will it too focus only on the cities? If you add it all up, infrastructure spending is far less than what the Liberals promised Canadians in order to get elected. In fact, by 2019, only 1/5 of their promised funding will be available to create jobs. It's a fact, Mr. Speaker, that roads, highways, ports, and rail infrastructure will get their funding from existing funds that our previous Conservative government already committed under our new Building Canada plan. The bottom line is that over the next 5 years, the Liberal government will borrow billions of dollars with little to show for it. Budget 2016 contains undisciplined spending, has no plan to balance the books, will fail to boost economic growth, and will raise taxes on families, on individuals, and on small businesses. Taxes that they cannot afford to pay if they are to not only grow, but thrive. So, Mr. Speaker, that is why the Conservative Party of Canada, and I as member of that, cannot support this budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.